The engine died somewhere outside Harlan County, and I thought, good, let it. I'd been driving for 11 hours straight through Nashville and Knoxville and then east into the mountains, where the radio stations drop out one by one until there's nothing left but static and your own thoughts. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34 years old. 3 weeks ago, I was a project manager at a logistics firm in Columbus, Ohio. Then the firm decided it didn't need project managers anymore, and I decided I didn't need Columbus. The house had been listed for $38,000. I didn't read the full description. Cutters Creek, West Virginia. Population 340, according to the sign at the town limit, though someone had spray painted a question mark after the number. The kind of town that exists in the crease of two mountains, where the sun disappears behind the ridgeline by 3 in the afternoon, and the shadows come early, whether you want them or not. The house sat at the end of a gravel road off Route 9. 2 stories, white paint gone the color of old bone, a porch that sagged on the left side, like something heavy had stood there too long. Behind it, the tree line started immediately. No yard, no fence, just the house, and then the woods pressing up against it, like they were trying to push it off the hill. I sat in the car for a while before getting out. The realtor, a woman named Patrice, who'd handled everything by email and never once suggested I visit before buying, had left the key under a ceramic frog on the porch steps. The lock turned smoothly, which surprised me. Everything else about the house looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but the lock was new. Inside smelled like cold ash and something underneath it I couldn't name. Not rot, not mold, something drier than that, like the air itself had been used up and never replaced. The front room had hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, and walls bare except for the rectangular shadows where pictures had hung. The kitchen was small white cabinets, a window above the sink that looked directly into the tree line. The trees were close enough that I could see individual branches. I didn't like that window. I brought my bags in and set up my air mattress in the back bedroom, the one that didn't face the woods. Heated a can of soup on the gas stove. Ate it standing at the kitchen counter because I didn't have a table yet, watching the trees go dark as the sun dropped behind the ridge. By 6 o'clock, it was fully night. I found the note at 6:15. It was on the fireplace mantle, folded once, written on paper the color of cream. I hadn't noticed it when I came in. I was certain it hadn't been in my hand when I unlocked the door. I was certain of a lot of things that night that I would later stop being certain about. At the top, in handwriting so careful it looked almost mechanical. This house has a nature. These are not suggestions. Below that, 8 numbered lines. I read them standing in front of the cold fireplace with my soup getting cold on the counter. 1. The back door must be bolted from the inside before dark. If you arrive after dark and the back door is unbolted, do not go to check it. Wait until morning. 2. Do not look directly at the tree line after 9 p.m. You may look at the yard. You may look at the sky. Do not look at the place where the yard ends. 3. If the temperature in any room drops suddenly, leave that room immediately and do not return until morning. 4. The basement door will sometimes open on its own. Close it. Do not go down. 5. You will hear sounds from the attic between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. These sounds are not a problem as long as you do not respond to them in any way. No speaking, no knocking back, no moving toward the attic stairs. 6. If something outside calls your name, it already knows your name. That is not a reason to answer. 7. On the 1st of every month, leave a bowl of water outside the back door before sunrise. Use well water only, not tap. 8. If you follow these rules, the house will leave you alone. If you don't, it won't. I folded the note and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I went and bolted the back door. I told myself it was a prank, local humor. Scare the newcomer from Ohio, give him something to think about his first night alone in the mountains. The note had probably been sitting on that mantle for weeks, left by whoever sold the place or whoever had lived here before. Patrice had mentioned previous owners only once in passing. Lovely family, relocated for work. I believed that for approximately 4 hours. At 2:17 a.m., the attic came alive. Not dramatically. No crashes, no screaming. Just movement. A slow, dragging weight crossing the floor above my head, back and forth, like something pacing. It paused, started again, paused. I lay on my air mattress and stared at the ceiling and remembered Rule 5. Do not respond in any way. No speaking, no knocking back, no moving toward the attic stairs. I didn't move. The pacing continued for 40 minutes. At 3:58, it stopped. I know the exact time because I watched every minute pass on my phone, counting them down, afraid to look away. At 4 a.m., the house went completely quiet. I didn't sleep after that. I lay there until the gray light came through the curtains and the birds started in the trees. And then I got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter and did not look at the window that faced the woods. I almost left that morning. I had my bag half packed when I stopped and sat down on the edge of the air mattress and thought about what I was going back to. An empty apartment in Columbus, a job market that didn't want me, a bank account that was already smaller than I liked to think about. I unpacked the bag. Whatever was in this house, I'd survived one night of it. I could survive another. Cutter's Creek had one gas station, one diner, a post office the size of a closet, and a general store called Duval's that sold everything from canned goods to hunting licenses. I drove into town the next morning needing coffee and groceries and maybe the sight of another human face. The woman behind the counter at Duval's was somewhere in her 70s, white hair pinned back, hands that moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing the same job for 40 years. Her name tag said Ruth. She looked up when I walked in, and I watched something pass across her face. Not surprise, exactly. More like recognition, though I'd never been in this town before in my life. You the one bought the Tilson place, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel Marsh, I said. Just moved in yesterday. She nodded slowly and went back to what she was doing. You need anything specific or just looking around? Coffee, groceries, well water. Is there a well on the property? Her hands stopped moving. There's a well behind the house, she said, between the back door and the tree line. You'll see it. She didn't ask why I needed well water. She just told me where it was. And then she started moving again, and something about the way she did it told me the conversation was over. I found 3 other people in town that morning, a man pumping gas who nodded at me and drove away before I could introduce myself, 2 older men on a bench outside the post office who watched me walk past without saying a word. Everyone knew who I was. Nobody wanted to talk about the house. I bought my groceries and drove back up Route 9 and found the well exactly where Ruth had said it would be. A stone circle about 30 feet from the back door with a wooden cover and a hand pump that still worked. I pumped a bowlful and left it on the back step, even though the first of the month was 2 weeks away. It felt like the right thing to do. The second night, I broke a rule by accident, not one of the important ones. Rule 2. Do not look directly at the tree line after 9 p.m. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, working through job listings I had no intention of applying for, and I looked up at the wrong moment. Just a glance. Automatic. The way your eyes move toward a window without asking permission. The tree line was dark. The yard between the house and the trees was empty. But at the exact point where the grass ended and the woods began, there was a shape, standing still, Too tall to be a deer, too wide to be a person, and too dark to make out any detail at all. I looked away immediately. My heart was hammering. I kept my eyes on the laptop screen and counted to 60, and then looked back at the window. At the yard, not the tree line, the way the rule specified. And whatever had been there was gone. The temperature in the kitchen dropped 20 minutes later. Not gradually. Between one breath and the next, the room went from normal to cold enough that I could see my own breath. I was on my feet before I'd made a conscious decision to stand, moving to the hallway, remembering Rule 3. If the temperature in any room drops suddenly, leave that room immediately. I stood in the hallway and listened. From the kitchen, a sound. So quiet I wasn't sure at first it was real. A low, resonant hum. Not mechanical, not like a refrigerator or a pipe. Organic, like something breathing at a frequency just below what ears are meant to hear, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It lasted 40 seconds. Then the kitchen went warm again, all at once, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't go back in for an hour. When I finally did, everything looked normal. Laptop still open on the table, coffee mug where I'd left it. The window above the sink dark and unremarkable. But on the kitchen counter, next to the stove, something had been left. A single crow feather, black, perfect, about 8 inches long, placed deliberately parallel to the edge of the counter, not dropped, positioned. I hadn't seen it before. I was certain of that. I picked it up carefully and carried it to the trash can and dropped it in. Then I went back to the counter and stood there looking at the spot where it had been. The house had noticed that I'd broken a rule. This was its way of telling me. Not a threat, not yet, just acknowledgement. I saw what you did. I didn't sleep much that second night either. The attic sounds came again at 2 a.m. The same slow pacing, the same deliberate weight moving back and forth across the floor above me. I lay still and kept my breathing even and said nothing and did not move toward the stairs. 4 a.m. it stopped. I was starting to understand the rhythm of the house. By the end of the first week, I had a routine. Back door bolted before sunset. Eyes away from the tree line after 9. Basement door checked and closed every morning. It had drifted open twice, both times in the night, both times with nothing visible at the bottom of the stairs when I looked down before closing it again. I'd stopped looking down before closing it. The attic sounds came every night between 2 and 4 without variation. I slept through them by the 5th night, not because I wasn't afraid, but because the fear had settled into something manageable, the way your body adjusts to cold water if you stay in long enough. The crow feather incident didn't repeat itself. I didn't look at the tree line again after 9, but I was aware in a way I couldn't quite articulate that something in the house was aware of me too. Not hostile, not friendly, just present in the way an old animal is present. Watching, assessing, deciding whether you were worth its attention. I started to think about the Tilson family, the ones Patrice had called lovely, the ones who had relocated for work. I wondered how long they'd lived here. I wondered what their routine had looked like. I wondered what had made them leave. On the 8th day, someone knocked on my front door at 9:47 p.m. I looked through the peephole before answering. It was a man I'd never seen before. 50s, heavy jacket, standing on my porch with his hands visible, not doing anything threatening. He looked cold. I almost opened the door. Then I remembered Rule 6. If something outside calls your name, it already knows your name. That is not a reason to answer. The rule was about names, not knocking. This man hadn't called my name. He'd just knocked. That was different. I put my hand on the deadbolt. "Mr. Marsh," the man said from the other side of the door. I took my hand off the deadbolt. "I know you're in there. I just want to talk. I used to live here. I want to tell you some things about the house." I stood at the door for a long time, not moving, listening to him breathe on the other side. "Please," he said, "there are things you need to know that aren't on the note." I pressed my back against the wall and slid down until I was sitting on the floor with my knees against my chest, and I waited. He knocked 3 more times over the next hour, each time a little softer than the last. At 11:15, the porch went quiet. I waited another 40 minutes before checking the peephole again. Empty porch, empty driveway, no car, no footprints in the mud that I could see in the porch light. Nobody had driven up. Nobody had walked away. He had simply been there, and then he wasn't. I sat on the floor by the front door until 2 a.m. when the attic started its nightly circuit above my head. The familiar dragging weight back and forth, patient as ever. For the first time, it felt almost comforting. Whatever was up there, at least I knew its schedule. The Harlan County Records Office was a single room on the 2nd floor of the courthouse in the town of Harlan, 40 minutes west on roads that followed the mountain contours like they were afraid to cut through them. A clerk named Boyd, young, bored, happy for something to do, pulled the property file for the Cutters Creek address without asking why I wanted it. The file was thin. Current owner, Daniel Marsh. Purchase date 3 weeks ago. Previous owner, Gerald and Susan Tilson. Purchase 1987. Sold to the bank following Gerald Tilson's death in 2019. Before that, a man named Ardell Combs, who'd owned the property from 1954 until he sold it to the Tilsons. Before Combs, a gap in the record. The file jumped from 1954 back to a land survey from 1931 with no ownership listed in between. And before 1931, a single line in faded typescript that Boyd had to hold under a desk lamp for me to read. Parcel previously designated. Ceremonial use. County acquisition 1931. Nature of prior use unrecorded. Ceremonial use. Boyd didn't know what it meant, said it wasn't uncommon for old Appalachian land records to have gaps, especially from before the Depression, said a lot of things got lost or never written down to begin with. I drove back to Cutters Creek with the windows down despite the cold, thinking about that phrase. Nature of prior use, unrecorded, not unknown, unrecorded. Someone had known and chosen not to write it down. I went to see Ruth at Duval's the next morning. She was alone in the store, reorganizing a shelf of canned goods with her back to the door. She didn't turn around when the bell above the door rang, but she said, "I wondered when you'd come ask." I stopped in the middle of the aisle. "Ask what?" "Whatever you went to Harlan to find out." She turned around then, looking at me the way people look at something they've been expecting for a long time. "Sit down. There's a stool behind the counter." I sat. Ruth had lived in Cutters Creek her entire life, 73 years. She'd known Gerald Tilson since he was a boy, known his father before him, known Ardell Combs in his last years as an old man who kept mostly to himself and never talked about the house except once when he was very sick, when he'd grabbed Ruth's mother's hand in the Harlan hospital and said, "Tell whoever buys it that the rules are in the fireplace." Not on the mantle, in the fireplace, under the left stone where you had to know to look. The rules were already there when Ardell bought the place, Ruth said. He told my mother he found them the first day. Said whoever wrote them had been gone a long time. How long? She shook her head. Nobody knows when the first ones came. The house has been there longer than anyone's family in this county, longer than the county itself, maybe. She paused. The Tilsons followed the rules for 30 years without incident. Gerald died of a heart attack in his sleep at 78 years old. Natural causes. Susan moved to her daughter's place in Roanoke the same week. She left voluntarily? She left because Gerald was gone and she wasn't willing to do it alone. Ruth looked at me steadily. It's not a job for one person past a certain age. I thought about that. What happens, I said, if someone stops following the rules? Ruth picked up a can of tomatoes and put it on the shelf. The Combs boy, she said, Ardell's nephew, stayed at the house one weekend in 1973 while Ardell was in Harlan. Didn't know the rules. Didn't know there were rules. She put another can on the shelf. They found him Monday morning sitting on the front porch. Couldn't speak. Couldn't say what happened. Spent the rest of his life in a facility in Charleston. She turned to look at me. He wasn't hurt. Nothing was broken. He just wasn't there anymore. Whatever had been behind his eyes. The store was very quiet. Why is nobody in this town willing to talk about this? I asked. We talk about it, Ruth said. Just not to people who've already bought the house. Nothing useful comes from scaring someone who has nowhere else to go. I drove home slowly, taking the curves on Route 9 without thinking about them, turning over what Ruth had said. It's not a job for one person past a certain age. A job. That was the word she'd used. Not a curse, not a haunting. A job. Something that required maintenance, attention, consistency. The rules weren't protection against something trying to hurt me. They were the terms of an arrangement. Ancient, unwritten in any language anyone remembered, but real the way gravity is real, whether you understood it or not. I pulled into the gravel drive and sat looking at the house for a long time before going inside. The house looked back the way it always did. The worst night came 2 weeks after I moved in, on a Tuesday with no warning. I'd followed every rule exactly. Back door bolted at 5:30, well before dark. Eyes off the tree line after 9, basement door checked. Closed, as always. TV on in the front room for company. The attic had been quiet for 3 nights running, which I'd noted in the small notebook I'd started keeping, and which I now understood to be unusual enough to pay attention to. 3 nights of quiet before the worst night. I don't think that was a coincidence. At 1:15 a.m., something called my name from the basement. Not a voice I recognized. That was the first thing I noticed. Every story I'd heard about this kind of thing involved familiar voices, dead relatives, old friends. This was none of those. This was a voice I had never heard before in my life, low and even, pronouncing my name the way you'd read it off a page. Daniel. Just that. Once. I was already awake. I'd been lying on my mattress listening to the silence where the attic sounds should have been. Uneasy in a way I couldn't name. When my name came up through the floorboards, I went completely still. Rule 4. The basement door will sometimes open on its own. Close it. Do not go down. The rule said close it. It didn't say what to do if something down there already knew you were home. Daniel. Same voice, same flat, patient tone. The way you call to someone you know will eventually come. I got up, walked to the basement door in the dark without turning on any lights, moving slowly, feeling my way along the hallway wall. The door was closed. I put my hand on it and stood there listening. From the other side, breathing, slow and deep, like something very large, very calm. I did not open the door. I stood there with my palm flat against the wood for 20 minutes, until the breathing stopped. Then I went back to my mattress and lay down and watched the ceiling until dawn. In the morning, I found the notebook I'd been keeping. The one where I logged every incident, every rule followed, every time the basement door drifted open or the attic moved open on the kitchen table to a page I hadn't written. My handwriting, my pen. The same blue ballpoint I kept on the table, but I hadn't written it. 4 words centered on the page. You are doing well. I closed the notebook. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen counter and drank it, and did not look at the window that faced the woods, and thought about the fact that whatever lived in this house had just in its own way told me it approved of me. That should have been terrifying. Somehow, it wasn't. I called Patrice that afternoon, the realtor. I'd been putting it off for 2 weeks, not sure what I would say or what I wanted to know. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Marsh, how's the house treating you?" "Fine," I said. "I wanted to ask about the previous owners, the Tilsons." A pause, short but deliberate. "Gerald passed away in 2019. Susan relocated to be closer to family. Standard situation. Did they leave anything behind?" Another pause. "Some furniture, a few personal items. Standard when a property goes to the bank after a death." "Patrice," I said, "did you know about the house before you listed it?" The longest pause yet. "Mr. Marsh," she said finally, "every house in this county has a history. I listed the property at fair market value with full disclosure of all material defects. Is there a specific concern I can address?" "No," I said, "no specific concern." "Good. Well, you know where to reach me." She hung up before I could say anything else. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked at the notebook, still closed where I'd left it. "You are doing well." Maybe I was. The notebook entry wasn't the last thing the house left me. 3 days later, I found a single sheet of paper slipped under the basement door, pushed through from the other side, the edge of it visible in the gap between the door and the floor. Cream-colored, same weight and texture as the original note. I stood looking at it for a long time before picking it up. The handwriting was different from the original rules. Looser, more hurried, like someone writing quickly. But the ink was the same black, the paper the same stock, and whatever had written it had pushed it under a locked door from a basement I had never entered. It said, "Rule 9. On nights when the fog comes down from the ridge and reaches the back door, do not open any window in the house until the fog lifts. If you wake and find a window already open, close it without looking outside. Do not try to remember opening it." I read it twice. Then I went to the kitchen drawer where I kept the original note and unfolded it and read through the 8 rules I'd memorized. Rule 9 hadn't been there before. I was certain of that. I folded both notes together and put them back in the drawer. The house was still writing its own instruction manual, and apparently it wasn't finished. The fog came 4 nights later. I woke at 3 a.m. to a stillness that felt different from ordinary night quiet. Thicker, muffled, the way sound behaves when snow has fallen, or when something large and soft has settled over everything. I lay on my mattress and listened, and heard nothing, not even the wind that usually moved through the ridge trees after midnight. I didn't get up to look. I knew what it was. At 4:15, I heard the window in the back bedroom, the empty room I used for storage, slide open. The sound was unmistakable. Old wooden frame painted shut for years, the particular resistance and then release of something that didn't want to move, being moved anyway. A slow, careful opening like someone trying not to wake the house. I was already sitting up. Close it without looking outside. I got to my feet in the dark and moved into the hallway and stopped outside the storage room door. From inside, cold air. Dense and wet, fog cold, the specific chill of water vapor moving through an open space. The window was open. I could feel it from the doorway. I went in without turning on the light, kept my eyes on the floor, on my own feet, on the path between the door and the window. I found the sill by feel, got both hands on the lower frame, and pushed it down. The latch clicked. I stood there with my hands on the closed window and my eyes on the floor and my heart going too fast, and I did not look outside. Something on the other side of the glass made a sound, not a word. Not anything I could name, just a sound, low and brief, the way an animal makes when it's been startled. Then nothing. I went back to my mattress and lay down and stared at the ceiling until the fog lifted at dawn, when the light changed and the normal sounds of the ridge came back. Birds, wind, the distant movement of the creek somewhere below the tree line. I checked the storage room in the morning. The window was latched from the inside. No marks on the sill, no mud on the floor below it, no sign of anything that would explain how it had opened. In the notebook I wrote, "Fog. Window in storage room opened on its own at 4:15 a.m., closed without looking. Sound from outside after closing. Unidentified." Then I wrote, "Rule 9 works." Something shifted after the fog night. Not dramatically, not all at once. But in the days that followed, I noticed small things. The basement doors stopped drifting open. The attic sounds, which had resumed their nightly schedule after the 3-night silence, became shorter. An hour instead of 2, then 40 minutes, then sometimes just 20 minutes of quiet movement before stopping. The house felt different in the mornings, lighter somehow, like a room after a window has been opened. Except I wasn't opening any windows. I mentioned it to Ruth on my next trip to Duval's. She listened without interrupting, which I'd learned was her way. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, rearranging something behind the counter that didn't need rearranging. "The Tilsons said the same thing," she said finally, around the 6-week mark. Said it started feeling different. Different how? Like it had decided about them. She looked up. "The house takes time to decide. First few weeks it's testing, I suppose is the word. Seeing what you'll do, whether you'll hold to the rules when it gets uncomfortable, whether you'll break when it pushes." She paused. "Sounds like it's decided about you. What does that mean exactly?" "Means you can probably sleep a little easier," she said. "Doesn't mean you stop following the rules. Means the house isn't working against you anymore." I thought about the notebook entry. "You are doing well." "Was that always the arrangement?" I asked. "For everyone who's lived there?" "The ones who stayed," Ruth said. "Yes. I started sleeping in the back bedroom, not the storage room. I moved the boxes to the front bedroom and set up my mattress in the back, the one that faced the tree line. I'd been avoiding it since the first day, keeping the curtains drawn, not spending time in there. But one morning I opened the curtains and stood at the window, looking out at the yard and the well and the tree line beyond, and I realized I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The trees were just trees in the morning light. The yard was just a yard. The well sat in the cold grass looking exactly like what it was. I stood there drinking my coffee and watching a pair of crows move through the upper branches of the nearest oak, and I thought, this is mine now. Not the deed, not the mortgage, the real ownership. The kind that comes from knowing a place in the dark, from learning its sounds and its silences and its requirements and meeting them night after night until they became as natural as breathing. The crows dropped out of the oak and flew toward the ridge without looking back. The most dangerous moment of my time in that house didn't come with fog or voices or windows opening on their own. It came on a Wednesday afternoon in ordinary daylight when I was fixing a loose board on the back porch, and I ran out of nails and went to the basement door to get more from the toolbox I'd seen through the gap at the bottom. The toolbox I'd never let myself go down and retrieve, because Rule 4 was Rule 4. I stood at the basement door with my hand on the knob and told myself it was daylight, told myself the rules said between sunset and sunrise, and the sun was directly overhead, and it was fine. Told myself the toolbox was right there at the bottom of the stairs, visible in the light from the gap under the door, and I'd be down and back up in 30 seconds. I turned the knob. The cold hit me before the door was fully open, not fog cold or night cold, something older than that. The kind of cold that doesn't have a weather explanation, that exists in spaces that have been sealed for a long time, that carries with it the specific pressure of something present and aware and very, very still. The basement stairs dropped into darkness. The toolbox was visible at the bottom. Old metal, red paint, exactly where I'd seen it. 6 steps down, 30 seconds. From somewhere below, in the dark beyond the toolbox, something exhaled. I closed the door. I closed it carefully, the way you close a door when you don't want to make any sudden movements, and I turned the latch and stood in the hallway with my back against the wall and waited for my heart to slow down. 30 seconds, 6 steps. I had almost convinced myself. I drove to the hardware store in Harlan for the nails. 40 minutes each way. When I got back, I finished the porch board and put my tools away and sat on the front steps in the afternoon light and thought about how close I'd come. Not to whatever was in the basement, to breaking the one rule I'd held absolutely since the first night, the rule that had no exceptions written into it, no qualifications, no unless or except when, just do not go down. The house had been lighter since the 6-week mark, calmer, almost companionable in its way, and I'd let that ease my guard in a moment of ordinary frustration over something as small as a box of nails. I wrote in the notebook that evening, almost broke Rule 4, daylight, toolbox visible, heard something exhale from the dark, did not go down. Below that I wrote, the rules don't have off days, neither can I. I underlined it. KL, KML, LLDS, Elkems, Wulkair. The answer came from the fireplace. Not from Ruth, not from the county records, not from anything I found online or in the Harlan Library's local history section, which I'd visited twice and found useful for nothing, except confirming that Cutter's Creek had existed since at least 1887 and had always been exactly as small and exactly as quiet as it was now. The answer came because on a cold November morning, 2 months after I'd moved in, I lit a fire for the first time. I'd been putting it off without fully understanding why. The fireplace worked. I'd checked the flue, confirmed the damper opened and closed, stacked wood on the hearth, but something had kept me from lighting it. Some instinct I hadn't examined closely enough to name. That morning I examined it. The instinct was this. Ardell Combs had told Ruth's mother that the rules were in the fireplace, under the left stone, where you had to know to look. The current rules had been on the mantle when I arrived, left there by the Tilsons before they left, but Ardell had found his copy under a stone, which meant there might be something else under that stone. The left hearthstone was flush with the others, no visible gap or seam. I pressed it, knocked on it, ran my fingers around the edges. Nothing. Then I pressed the far left corner with the heel of my hand and felt it shift. A 1/4 inch, maybe less, a slight give that the others didn't have. I got a flathead screwdriver from my toolbox and worked it into the edge and levered carefully. The stone lifted. Underneath, a shallow recess cut into the subfloor. Inside the recess, a tin box, the kind that might have held tobacco or tea, its lid sealed with age and pressure. I carried it to the kitchen table and opened it. Inside the tin were 3 things. The first was a folded piece of paper, older than the cream-colored stock I'd been finding. Yellowed, brittle at the edges, the handwriting in faded brown ink that might have been black once. The rules, all 9 of them, in the same careful phrasing I'd memorized, with one difference. At the top, instead of "this house has a nature," these are not suggestions. The original reads simply, "for whoever comes after." The second thing was a photograph. Black and white, small, the kind taken with an old box camera. A man standing in front of the house. My house, unmistakably the same sagging porch, the same tree line pressing up behind it. The man was in his 40s, maybe 50s, wearing work clothes, and looking directly at the camera with an expression I recognized without being able to name it immediately. It took me a moment. Then I had it. He looked settled. Not happy exactly, not peaceful in any simple way, but settled. Like a man who had found the specific place in the world where his particular weight was needed and had put it down. On the back of the photograph, in the same faded handwriting as the rules, E.H. Pruitt. This house, 1928. The third thing in the tin was a single crow feather. Black, perfect, about 8 inches long. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with those 3 things in front of me. E.H. Pruitt had lived in this house in 1928, 3 years before the county acquisition that had wiped his name from the property record. He had written the rules. He had left them under the hearthstone with a photograph of himself and a crow feather, knowing that someday someone would find them. For whoever comes after. Not if someone comes after. For whoever comes after, certainty. He'd known there would be someone, the way you know the sun will come up. Not because you can prove it, but because the alternative is unthinkable. He had done this job, kept these rules, learned this house the way I was learning it, and at some point he had left, or died, or simply been done, and the house had waited through Ardell Combs and the Tilsons and 4 empty years, until I drove 11 hours from Columbus with half my savings and bought it without reading the full listing. I thought about the man in the photograph, the settled look, the particular weight of someone who has found his place. I thought about Columbus, the empty apartment, the job market, the mornings that had no shape because nothing required me to be anywhere or do anything or hold any particular line. I picked up the crow feather and turned it in my fingers. That evening I did something I hadn't done since the first week. I took out a sheet of cream-colored paper. I'd found a stack of it in the desk upstairs, same weight and stock as every note the house had ever left me, as if it had been waiting there for exactly this purpose. And I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote. Not the rules. I had those memorized. I wrote something else, something I hadn't planned to write until I was already writing it. To whoever finds this, my name is Daniel Marsh. I came to this house in October, not knowing what it was. I know now. I'm not leaving. The rules work. Follow them exactly. The timing matters, the specifics matter, the precision matters. Don't look for reasons. Don't test the edges. The house is not trying to hurt you. It is trying to exist alongside you, and the rules are the terms of that existence. There will be nights when something in the basement calls your name. There will be fog. There will be a shape at the tree line that you will see once by accident and never look for again. There will be sounds from the attic that will become, eventually, as ordinary as rain. None of it will hurt you if you hold the line. The house has a nature. These are not suggestions. For whoever comes after. I folded the paper and put it in the tin box with E.H. Pruitt's photograph and his crow feather and my own copy of the rules. Then I replaced the hearthstone and pressed it down until it was flush with the others. Insurance for a future I wasn't planning on needing. Winter came to Cutter's Creek the way it comes to mountain towns. All at once, without apology. Snow on the ridge before Halloween and ice on Route 9 before Thanksgiving. I bought a better coat and a proper set of snow boots and a cord of firewood from a man 3 miles up the road who didn't ask why I needed so much. I finally lit the fireplace. The first fire I'd built in that hearth, in a house that had held fires for 100 years or more. The wood caught clean and the chimney drew well, and the front room filled with the kind of warmth that comes from a real fire. Uneven, directional. The side of your face nearest the flames too hot, and the side away from it still cool. I sat on the floor in front of it because I still didn't have a couch, and I thought I might not get one. The floor was fine. The attic moved softly overhead, shorter now than ever. 15 minutes, sometimes 10, like it was checking in rather than patrolling. The basement door stayed closed. Ruth asked me in December whether I was staying through the winter. Through the winter, I said, and after. She looked at me for a long moment, the same way she'd looked at me the first morning I walked into Duval's. Then something in her face that had been held carefully in place for 2 months released, and she nodded once, slowly. "Good," she said. "That's good." She turned back to her shelves. I gathered my groceries. At the door, I stopped. "Ruth," I said, "how long did the Tilsons stay?" 32 years, she said, without turning around. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. 32 years seemed like a reasonable start. On the 1st of December, I went out before sunrise and drew a bowl of water from the well. The air was below freezing, my breath visible, the ground iron hard under my boots. The well water came up cold and clean, and I carried it to the back door and set it on the step and stood there for a moment in the dark, looking at the tree line. I didn't look at the place where the yard ended. I looked at the sky above the trees, gray going lighter at the edges, the specific gray of a winter dawn in the mountains, heavy and clean at the same time. A crow called from somewhere in the upper branches once, and then was quiet. I went back inside and bolted the door and put the kettle on. The house settled around me. Small sounds, familiar ones. The tick of the heating pipe, the particular creak of the 3rd floorboard from the kitchen door, the soft movement of something in the attic that was already winding down for the morning. My sounds now, my house, my job. I poured the coffee and stood at the counter and did not look at the window that faced the woods, and felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, exactly like a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. Outside, the crow called once more from the ridge. I raised my mug toward the window. "Morning," I said. The house was quiet around me, the way a house is quiet when it's listening. And somewhere in the trees, the crow called back.